Hi everybody, Carol here. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to make a card from Stampin' Up! Called City of David. It's a Christmas card, and going to be taking these stamps out and getting them ready to go. All of them except one, which is a sentiment that I could come back later and put it on the inside of the card. And use my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a pigment ink, but it is really good for stamping if you want fine details. And it's my go-to ink in black. Now I'm going to stamp this at the top of, I'm going to line my stamp up with the top edge of a blue sheet of paper, medium blue. It is 4.5 inches wide. The length doesn't matter because we're going to go back and cut this out at the bottom, as long as it's just long enough to cover the whole stamp. So I'm mashing it pretty good, trying to get a good impression. I make size A6 cards, so they are 6 1/4 by 4.5. But I start with my 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and cut it down to 9, and then I put it on the 4 1/4. And made it just a little bit shorter so that the colored paper will overhang and I don't have to go back and trim out white. And then I'll cut one more, same dimensions, 9 by 6 1/4. But instead of going over and folding on the scoreboard and scoring it first at the 4.5 mark, I will actually cut this in half at the 4.5 mark because I need 2 card fronts, and these will go on top of the card base. So I will set those aside with everything else and get this ready to go. The white piece of paper I'm loosely measuring at the bottom where I want the stamp excuse me, that has Mary and Joseph on it, and I either set my stamp down loosely, just hovered it over the top to see about where I wanted it, or you can also stamp it off on a piece of scrap paper, loosely cut it out, and put it down just to get an idea of where you want Mary and Joseph to go. I knew I wanted them in the lower right-hand corner, so I just did a measurement of like for their bottom of their feet and maybe his hand or the top of his head. Just get some guidelines as to where you want those that particular stamp to go down in the bottom. So rather than just stick it down there, I thought I'll give myself a little guideline once again for the feet and near the top of the body. So that one gets stamped again, and we'll set aside. I'll make 2 cards today. And now I'm going to stamp a sentiment, and this stamp has more than one sentiment on it. So I want the bottom one that says Christmas blessings from our house to yours, or to you and yours is what it says. So I'm trying to ink the bottom of that stamp up very carefully on the ink pad so that I only ink that bottom sentiment. And so I'm lining the stamp up, the edge of the paper. These are my scraps of paper that I have when I originally cut off that 9-inch strip, and or the 6 1/4 for that matter. But I save my scraps, and then they're good for things like this. Now I'm going to continue this hillside line, horizon line, out onto the card, and I'm just using a blue pencil so that I don't have to worry about a pencil line later. I'm in a blue colored pencil. And as I cut it out, I will go around this palm tree trunk, which is not completely necessary because you certainly can go back and draw that in with a black ink pen. I will go back in a little while and do the same thing with a black ink pen, because I'm going to cut this little piece of the hillside off rather than try to cut that skinny little strip, and I'll go all the way across. and this will fit on the top of the white card. Now I'm trying to get rid of any blue that might show, because it is going to be on top of a white card, and I don't want that to show. That hill line is the dividing line. And so when I pull that back in, you can see when we place it at the top, that's what it's going to look like. Now I'm going to reinforce that black line that shows the hillside. So I'm going to trace it off with the pencil, because some of it might have gotten cut off, and this will just make it stronger, and a stronger line. And then just sketch in the hillside slope there as best I can, and kind of the way the stamp looks. I am using my Millennium pens here. It's a set. I'm using the biggest one and drawing that line in. And on the stamp itself, there are thicker parts of that line, and so I'm trying to go back and make some little thicker sections just to follow the stamp. And same way with this one, it has a little thicker section right in there. And then also, just in case I don't line that up perfectly, some of that might get covered up. So I will go back and I'll put this blue piece on top of the white, and but before I do that, I want to color in the sky just a little bit. I used a blue piece of paper, obviously, but I wanted to make it a little darker night sky. So putting a scrap piece of paper under there, I'm using an old stencil brush, because I just can work that better than some of these other little round ink applicators, and I have the hardest time not getting a circle. And so this is for me, it's just easier to work with this. It takes longer because it's slower applying the ink, but just kind of going around, and it does build up pretty fast. And I'm fast forwarding, of course, through this, but I'm getting some color on there, as you can tell, and then I'm kind of trying to smooth it out a little bit, blend it out a little bit. And in a little while, I will go get a makeup sponge, because I have a base down there, and I can still get lines with the makeup sponge, but I just try to be careful. I'm going around the edge to kind of put a frame on that, and then I'm bending the sponge up a little bit and tapping off onto that scrap paper there, and trying to darken it up even a little more, and then extend it even to the middle of the card. And just stop at any time when you're satisfied with how dark it is, but I'm just trying to blend them all together and get the colors. But it's easier for me to start on a colored sheet than to start on a white and try to get it all completely blue. And this works too when you can stamp first. That makes it easy too. So at some point you call it done. I went back and blended a little more with the stencil brush, because it's a lighter touch and puts down a lighter coat of paint, and just kind of smooth out any rough edges that might be there. So I'm going to call it quits, and then I'm going to have to get some glue on the back of these pieces, and I'll use my trusty Tombow liquid glue, and it's repositionable. So that's my favorite part about it. Now, before I get away from this stamp of the village, I'm going to stamp it one more time. I'm just twisting and turning the paper so that I can get more on. Be sure I get the whole thing to fit on there. I'm going to cut out the village, because I didn't want the village to just be totally blue. So I am cutting out the little village of Bethlehem there. And it doesn't take long. I don't try to cut out the palm trees or any of the lines. I just go only around the buildings. And before I do, I thought, rather than just put it down and it would be stark white against the blue sky, I'm going to color it in with a little bit of blue, just to kind of show a little cast of blue on it from the sky, and a little bit in the evening or night, and there are shadows. And so I'm just putting on a light shade of, I think it's sky blue, And then I'm going to go back and use some of that cerulean blue up there and darken in, just kind of shade it around the corners of the building. It's just barely shows up, but it does give it a nice touch. And it does, to me, it makes it look better, especially up close. So we'll go back around the edges, darken up just a little bit. I still want it to look light. At the end of the video, I have another card that shows I did keep the whole thing blue. I did not go through this step. I just used the blue top, and I took a white chalk pencil and colored in the village of Bethlehem there with the white, just to see if it would look as good. I kind of think it doesn't show up as much. And then, by the way, you probably saw me there going back with the yellow just to color in the windows. To show some light, some candle light showing through the windows and give it a more of a night look. And cutting off any little extra pieces of white. And that's where it's going to go. So just another way of doing a scene. So here goes my tombow. Put it on now, set it aside in a minute for it to dry. It's obviously wet right now. You can tell because it's white. And then it will dry in a few minutes to clear. And then it's repositionable. Now I'm going back to another stencil brush, and I'm going to color this in. You could leave it stark white. That is fine with me. But I'm trying to make it look more like sand. So I think this is caramel that I'm using, but I don't have to worry about the top up there because that's going to be covered by the blue. So I'm just dragging down some tan. Actually hit the stencil brush on it a little bit to give it kind of a little tiny tips and points of color that would look kind of like sand. So here they are. Glued the blue onto the white. Now I'm gluing the whole panel onto my card base. And then here comes the little village of Bethlehem, and with that lightly colored blue. And that makes the town. I cut out the sentiment that says Christmas blessings to you and yours, and I'm gluing that down to the edge, the left edge of the paper, somewhere between the village and Mary and Joseph. And there you have it. I hope you'll give it a try. Use what you have. This is just all about ideas. And there's one at the end using rectangular dies. It's completely different from this, but just to give you another idea. And please come back in a few days. I'll have another video out. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you soon.